So what we are going to do now is go over the Torah portion, which is entitled Vayeshev. Vayeshev actually covers Genesis 37 through 40. This is really one of the most important Torah portions, in my opinion, in the book of Genesis. It's so monumental, everything that happens in this Torah portion. I was very excited to be able to actually teach on this Torah portion, but then I found myself overwhelmed at trying to put this message together. I have so much that I want to say in this message. There's so much happening in here that I don't know whether or not I'm going to be able to get to all of it. I feel like if I begin to speak, it's just going to open up the floodgates. But let's try to summarize it. Go ahead and open up to Genesis 37, and let's start looking at some of it. So I just want to begin with a verse out of Isaiah. And it says in Isaiah 58:12, it says, "And thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in." I'll read that again. I want you to hear what I'm saying right there. Isaiah gives out a promise to the people, and he says it's possible that you could be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. There's a Hebrew concept called tikkun olam, and I'm going to use this word tikkun quite a bit. I don't always like to use Hebrew words, but sometimes a Hebrew word is so much more richer than any English word that I feel like we need to use it. So the word tikkun, it means to repair. Tikkun olam means to repair the world. This is a concept that runs throughout Genesis. It's all over the place. In fact, it's the whole point of the book of Genesis, and I would actually say it's the whole point of the Bible. It's where we are in the storyline. You know, because Adam, when he came into this world, he sinned, and he brought this world into disrepair. He brought it into a state of ruin, actually. And the consequences of Adam's transgression are seen in each and every story that you find in the book of Genesis. And not only that, not only do you see his consequences, but you see a positive thing that's happening in the book of Genesis too, where certain characters come along, and they're in a sense given the opportunity to either do what Adam did and thus transgress, or undo what Adam did and in a sense repair the world. And if there's anything that you should have learned from the initial story of the Bible and the rest of the Bible, is it's teaching you about the garden of consequences, right? And that's one thing that a garden should teach you for sure, is that there's consequences, that you reap what you sow, right? I mean, that's it. That's what Scripture says. And this is actually very, very important, because the Bible says to not take this seriously, that you don't take seriously that you reap what you sow, is tantamount to mocking God. To believing that there are not consequences to what you do and what other people do is tantamount, the Scripture says, to mocking God. It says, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he shall also reap." Not only that, Scriptures also teach that God visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. That when you sin, your sin actually has consequences not only for you in your life, but for your children in their lives, and their children in their lives, and their children in their lives. God will revisit that same iniquity on there. But it's not always negative. There's a bright side, because people can come along and make tikkun. They can get presented once again with the same type of circumstances and have the opportunity to replay what their parents do, or to actually undo what their parents do, and thus change the world and change the storyline of the world. And so we find at the very beginning of our Torah portion, if you're looking in verse, I guess, does it start in verse 1 of? Yeah, verse 1 of 37. It says, "And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan." It says, "These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph." Right? These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph. Right? So you can't just read that sentence as, "These are the Toldot, these are the generations of Jacob, it's only Joseph." It's not true that it's only Joseph. Jacob had lots of different offspring. Jacob, we know, had 12 sons. It wasn't only Joseph, but the text right here is presenting to you that the ramifications of what Jacob did, right, are seen primarily in the life of Joseph. And so let's look at some of these consequences. And let's see how Jacob's life, which we've been reading about in each of these Torah portions through the past few weeks, actually play out in the life of his sons and primarily in the life of Joseph. Number one, what's something that we learned about in Jacob's life in the past? We learned that his father had a problem, and what was it? It was showing favoritism, right? You remember this? You remember Isaac? It said that he loved Esau because he ate of his son's venison. That's back in 25:28. So Isaac showed favoritism. Not only did Isaac show favoritism, that trait worked itself out also in Jacob's life, right? And Jacob too began to show favoritism. And who did he show favoritism to? Look in verse 3 of chapter 37. It says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors." So we see not only is Israel, who is also the same as Jacob, not only did he show favoritism, but he showed favoritism, and you have one of these Torah symbols that get reused over and over again. He showed favoritism, and he also ended up having a special coat because of that. Now, I want you to remember that coat was important back in the Jacob story, right? Because what happened? What did Jacob do? What did he take from his brother Esau when he went to steal the blessing? He took his coat, right? So we find these two symbols repeated once again. Jacob goes and takes his coat. Not only that, what's another thing we learned about from Jacob's story that gets repeated into this story? We learn about that Jacob stole the birthright from his brother, right? That's what the text says. He bought it from him, basically. But he stole it from him. He got it deceitfully. So who did the birthright generally go to? It went to the firstborn. So guess what? You had somebody sell the birthright, and guess what happens here in this story? Who does Israel love and show that he's placing upon him the identity of the firstborn? It's Joseph. And so guess what happens to Joseph in this story? He's sold, right? In the same way that Jacob got Esau to sell his birthright, the consequence of that works out in this story, and now Joseph, who is the firstborn, is also sold. Not only that, right? If you look, you can look in 37:25 in this chapter. Well, actually, let me just read where it says that they sold Joseph. Look in 37. We'll start in 26. It says, "And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother," talking about Joseph, "and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brethren were content. So we see that they were going to sell Joseph in the same way that the firstborn, or the birthright, rather, was sold in the previous story. Not only that, look in 37:25. What does it say? It says, "And they sat down," this is right before they talk about selling their brother. It says, "And they sat down," talking about the brethren, "to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices and balm and myrrh, and going to carry it down to Egypt." So what do we see? We see right here that a bunch of brothers are now sitting down to eat bread, and you've got a company of Ishmaelites coming from a place called Gilead, and they're coming on camels, right? And they're coming to basically end up buying Joseph off of the brethren. Well, let's look at how that's an echo from a previous portion in the previous part in Genesis, in Jacob's life. Look in 31. I want to read 32 through 47. Look in chapter 31. So in this part of the story, Jacob has left Laban. He's been sojourning with Laban for a while, and he's getting ready to leave. And as he leaves, Laban is upset, and he's chasing after him. Now Rachel, his wife, has actually stolen Laban's gods, what are called teraphim, in this story. So she's stolen them and hidden them away. And Laban's upset about this, and he goes now to chase him. So let's see what happens after Laban catches up with Jacob right here. In verse 32, I'm in 31, 32 through 47. It says, "With whomsoever," this is Jacob talking to Laban, he says, "With whomsoever you find your gods, let him not live," right? That's what he says. He says, "With whomsoever you find your gods, let him not live." Because Jacob's absolutely sure that he has not taken these gods. But the book of Proverbs says in chapter 18, it says, life and death are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Right? So Jacob actually pronounces a curse over Rachel right here, which is actually going to cause her to lose her life. Not only that, it's going to work itself out. He says, with whomsoever you find your gods, let him not live. Before our brethren, this is such an important word in Genesis, he says, discern, harkerna, what is thine with me, and take it unto thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and in the two maidservants' tent, but he found them not. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the images and put them in what? In camel's furniture, right? So she took the idols and she hid them in a camel's like sack, basically, I guess like a saddle that sat on the camel, and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. And she said unto her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before you, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. So what's Rachel really saying right here? She's hidden the idols, and she says, don't make me get up, right? I'm on my monthly cycle right now. You make me get up, what are you going to find underneath me? A bunch of bloody clothes, right? A bunch of bloody clothes. Remember that, right? Remember that. A bunch of bloody clothes. It says, verse 36, and Jacob was angry. He was wroth, and he chode with Laban. And Jacob answered and said unto Laban, what is my trespass, and what is my sin that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? Whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all thy household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. These 20 years have I been with thee. And listen what he says. He says, thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young. You know how you say ewe in Hebrew? Rachel, right? That's how you say it. That's the word for you right there. And he says, you know what? All this time I've been with you, your ewes, your Rachel, they've never miscarried, right? What's going to happen? Rachel's going to give birth, and she's going to end up dying in the process instead of miscarrying. Not only that, he says, thy ewes and thy goats have not cast their young. The rams of thy flocks have I not eaten. That which was, listen to this, torn of beasts, I brought not unto you. I bear the loss of it. Of my hand you did require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was in the day, the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been 20 years in thy house, and have served 14 years for thy 2 daughters, 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages these 10 times. So they end up making this covenant there. Okay, look in verse 44. He says, now therefore, come now, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. And Jacob took stones and set it up for a pillar. And Jacob said unto his brethren, gather stones. And they took stones and made a heap, and they did eat there upon the heap. And Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galid, right? He called it Galid. And then look down in verse 54. It says, and Jacob offered sacrifices upon the mount, called his brethren to eat bread. And they did eat bread and tarried all night in the mount. And so guess what we found back in chapter 37? You have the brethren, and they're sitting there, and they're eating bread. And guess who's coming from a place called Galed? These Ishmaelite merchants. And what are they coming on? Camels. And guess what we're going to learn about? We're going to learn about somebody who was torn by beasts and bloody clothes and all of these other echoes from Jacob's life previously that get worked out in this story. So they come, right? We see not only Jacob's sins being worked out in the life of his children, we begin to see Rachel's sins also worked out. And so look in chapter 37, verses 31 through 33. What does it say right here? It says, and they took Joseph's coat, right? This is after they sell him, right? They come back. He's not in the pit anymore. They take his coat, and they kill a kid of the goat, and dip the coat in blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it unto their father, and said, this have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it, and he said, it is my son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And so we see right here, and actually that whole little portion right there, if you're looking at it at the very end, from verses 28 to 36, it's all a chiasm. And that's the center point right there, right? Where the children ask him, recognize this coat. is this your son's coat or not? And so think about all the things that happened from the previous story with Rachel saying, oh, I can't get up. I'm on these camels, right? All this bloody clothes before me. Now they take Joseph's special coat. They dip it in the blood of a goat, and they present it to their father, and they say, Father, will you, and here's this word, hakerna, will you recognize this? Is this your son's coat or no? And if we're not thinking about the previous stories in Genesis, we miss the significance of this moment. Because what was it that Jacob did to his father Isaac? Did he not come before him in his brother's coat and basically ask that question? Will you not recognize if this is your son's coat or no? Can't you discern whether this is your son's coat or not? It's the exact same question that he made his father deal with. He also now has to wrestle with the consequence of that, and his sons are doing the very same thing. It's incredible to see how it works out. Not only that, though, you find all of these other incredible things that are happening in this Torah portion. Not only do you see, if you're looking carefully, Jacob's lives and his sins and what he did work out in the life of his sons. If you're reading real carefully, you'll see also that Abraham, in some of his successes, are actually at work in the same story. And so Nate mentioned this at Sharon's funeral. He said something so beautiful, I'm not going to be able to eloquently say it like he did, but he talked about how when you have two ripples in water that impact each other, that it actually changes the course of where these ripples are going to finally land on the shore. And so we see that not only is Jacob's life a ripple that is affecting Joseph's life, also Abraham's life is also a ripple that is affecting Joseph's life. So look at where you see this. I just want to point it out real quick. Okay, if you went back to verse 3 in this chapter, you would see that it said that Joseph was a loved son, right? What's that an echo of in Abraham's story? Doesn't God say to Abraham, take now your son, your only son whom you love, and offer him upon? So we're going to see all of these echoes from the Akedah in this passage. Not only that, not that only is an echo. Look in verse 13. What does it say? And Israel said unto Joseph, do not your brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come now, and I will send you unto them. And he said, Hineni. He said, here am I. What was it that Abraham said to God? God called unto Abraham, and he said, Hineni, right? There, look in verse 22. What does it say in 22? And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness. Lay no hand upon him, that he might rid them out of their hands to deliver him from the father. Again, what happened with Isaac, right? He was there. He was about to be slain, right? But suddenly an angel comes up and says, do not, what? Exact same words. Do not lay a hand upon this child, right? Literally, Abraham's actions preserving the life of Joseph in the future. And finally, look at this echo in verse 25. What does it say? And it says, and they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold. What was it that happened right after the angel stopped Abraham from offering Isaac upon the altar? Right? It says, the angel came and said, lay not your hand upon the altar. And it says, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a ram caught in the thicket. We see his story like a ripple affecting Joseph's life, right? So not only do you have the symphony of Jacob's life weaving into his, and his failures showing up there, you have the success of Abraham at the same time affecting Joseph's life. The Torah is incredible. There's no other book like this. It's phenomenal. Well, when you get into chapter 38, what are we going to see? It's going to say in verse 1 that after all of this happened, and it came to pass at this time that Judah went down from his brethren, and he turned into a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. It says that after all this happened, that Judah went down, right? So we're going to learn about Judah's descent, and then Judah making a tikkun, making a repair. So in this chapter, if you're reading the whole Torah portion, in fact, if you're reading Genesis as a whole, this chapter should stand out to you because, wait a minute, I thought we were learning about Joseph. In fact, you're reading all about Joseph, and you think this is where the storyline is going, but you have this story that interjects itself in the middle of all of it with Judah and Tamar, and it's a bizarre story. What happens? I'll just summarize because I know I only have so much time. But in this story, we have Judah go down from his brethren. And that word, it's Vayered, that he went down. That's an active. The same thing's going to be said of Joseph, but it's going to say Hored, that one is active, the other one's passive. Judah is actively going down. Joseph is made to go down, right? So, but in this chapter where Judah is going down, right, he's falling from his brethren. He's falling from this position of honor that he would have had, that he should have had, because Reuben had already lost the birthright blessing. Simeon and Levi had already lost the birthright blessing. It would have went to Judah. And we're going to see by these actions and what he done, he should have also lost this birthright blessing. But we're going to see how he regains it. So what happens? He goes down. He ends up marrying a Canaanite woman, right? Not a good thing. Shouldn't have done this. He ends up having these 3 children by her, Onan, and Shelah. Right? Is wicked. The Lord slays him. Onan is supposed to perform this act called Yibum, which is like a Levirate marriage, where he's supposed to raise up a child to his brother in his brother's name. Now, bear in mind why nobody wants to perform this ritual. Because if your brother dies, guess who the firstborn status goes to? You. You step in this. You perform this ritual, guess what you do? You raise him back up, and now he again is the firstborn. So people don't want to do this. So what does he do? He spills the seed on the ground. He says, no, not good. The Lord ends up killing him because of it. Now Judah, who made his father feel so much pain about losing children, right? Oh, your son Joseph is dead, right? And his father's weeping, mourning. Now Judah has lost 2 children. And so he says to Tamar, this girl who had married Onan, look, just remain a widow, right? When Shelah grows up, I'll give her to you. But he ends up not doing it. So Judah's wife dies. And he goes down to shear his sheep and to comfort himself. And Tamar, who's been sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting for this seed, for this promised seed, that's a messianic motif, for this promised seed, been waiting for it, right? She thinks, Judah's not going to give me Shelah, his son, and I'm not going to be able to raise up this seed once again. So she disguises herself as a harlot. She goes down and she pretends to be a harlot, and she's gonna get this seed one way or another. Remember how Judah deceived people earlier in the chapter? So now what? Now he's being deceived by her. And look at what's going to happen. You have this conversation that takes place in verse 17 and 18. It says, and the man said, I'm in the wrong chapter. In 38, 17, 18, right? The woman basically asks, right? She says, what will you give me that you may come in to me? And he said, I will send you a kid from the flock. And she said, will you give me a pledge that you will send it? And he said, what pledge shall I give thee? And she said, your signet, your bracelet, and your staff that is in your hand. And he gave it her and came unto her, and she conceived by him. So you have this part in the story right here where she says, listen, if you're going to come into me, you're going to give me something for this. So what does Judah say? Oh, I'll give you a goat. This is the same goat that's reoccurring in every story. Remember, it was Jacob who gave a goat to his father, wearing the goat's clothes and the coat when he deceived him. It's the same goat from the next story where they take the goat and they dip the coat in its blood and present it to the father. Now Judah's saying, I'll send you this goat. Again, it's this thing repeating and cycling back around once again. And she says, okay, fine, I'll accept the goat, right? And you as a reader ought to really know what this means. So what are you going to give me in the meantime? Well, what do you want? Give me your staff, your signet ring, and your bracelet, right? And what are these symbols? These are all kingly authority symbol. It's the king's symbol, which is a staff. It's the king who has a signet ring that can put it in his name. These are symbols of a king. And she says, give them to me. And so he loses them in the process, right? Because he tries to give her this goat the next day. She's not around. Where are these symbols? We can't find her, right? What's going on? Judah says, just let her go with it. I don't want to be ashamed by any of this. 3 months later, guess what? Tamar shows she's pregnant. So they tell Judah, oh, you know what? This daughter of yours has been a harlot and has performed these sexual immoral act, and now she's pregnant through harlotry. Now, Judah had just been with a harlot 3 months earlier, right? But all of a sudden, he has all this righteous indignation. Bring her out and let her be burned, right? So he's bringing her out, right? But guess what she has, right? She brings out these things, this staff, the signet, and the bracelet. And she says, by the man to whom these belong, I'm pregnant. Let's look at those verses right there because it's important. Look in verse 24. It says, and it came to pass about 3 months after, that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot also, and she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth, and let her be burnt. And when she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whom these are, I am with child. And listen to this word. And she said, discern, I pray thee, who these are, the staff, the signet, and the bracelet, right? Same word that Judah asked his father, can you discern whose coat this is, right? The same question that was asked to Isaac in previous generations, right? It said that Jacob stood before him and he said, are you really my son? Are you really my son Esau? And he said, yes. And it says, and he discerned him not, right? He didn't know. Now Judah's forced with this question. Will you acknowledge this? Will you acknowledge this? Will you acknowledge your transgression, right, is what it is. Will you acknowledge your transgression? And Judah's left with a choice, right? What am I going to do, right? If I acknowledge it, what does it make me look like, right? He could have just said, I don't know whose those are. Let's get the fire going and let's burn her, right? But he says, look at what he says. Verse 26. It says, and Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more. So Judah acknowledges, right? He acknowledges his transgression, and he changes history in this moment. He literally changes history. He gets back the staff. He gets back the signet. He gets back all these things you think, it was through shame that he ended up getting the crown again, right? These are messianic ideas that are embedded in Genesis. So important. He's willing to do this. And you know what? What does it take to repair the world? It takes acknowledging the truth, right? If we're going to repair the world, if we're going to repair our own lives, it's going to take acknowledging the truth. It's going to take speaking the truth. It's going to take saying, I want to repair what was done wrong in previous generations, right? And because of this, you get the sign of Tikkun. Look at what happens, right? Judah, by this action, actually takes what should have happened and repairs the storyline. And if you're not thinking of Genesis this way, you'll miss this. But look at what he says. It says, and it came to pass, right? And it came to pass in the process of time that, behold, there were twins in her womb. When's the last time there were twins in a womb? Jacob and Esau. There's twins in her womb. You remember a color that was associated with Esau? Remember? Red? Okay, yeah, good. Glad y'all remember, right? And it said, and it came to pass when she travailed that one put out his hand, right? And the midwife took it and bound upon his hand, what? A scarlet thread, saying, this one came out first, right? And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out, and she said, how hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name is called Pharez. And afterward came out his brother, and he had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So you have what should have taken place. The firstborn should have been another Esau. But because of Judah's actions, he changed what would have happened and made what should have been a secondborn come out first. And now it's Pharez. And now Pharez is out, and this is literally where the messianic line comes through. Literally comes through this child, right? Remember Isaiah said you'll be called a repairer of the Pharez, of the breach, right? A restorer of paths to dwell in. So amazing to me. All right, I'm going to go through this quick. I wanted to read all of 39, but you know this story, so I'm just going to summarize it super quick. We pick back up again with Joseph, and he was the one who was caused to go down, and he descended into Egypt. Remember, he was sold into slavery, and he's there, and he ends up being bought by a guy named Potiphar, and he's in his house, and carrying the idea of tikkun that's been going through this. Now we have a character, Joseph, who on the crest of Judah's tikkun, right, is at a position to actually not merely make reparations and restoration for the life of his father, Jacob, or Isaac, or Abraham, and so forth. He's in a position now where he's going to repair Adam's sin. It's what's happening in this chapter is cosmic in its importance, right? So he's there, and it doesn't seem like it would be, but it is. It is in Genesis. He's there in the house, right? He's in Potiphar's house. Guess what Potiphar does, right? You can look at it. Okay, first thing, right? Joseph is called Ish in verse 2. It says he was a prosperous man. Why do you need to tell me he's a prosperous man, right? I know he's a man. I know, if there's anything I know Joseph's a man, right? But he calls him Ish. Ish is important because it's going to call Potiphar's wife Ishet, right? These are the two names, man and woman, that are used in Genesis chapter 2, right? It's a whole story about Ish and Ishet, right? The man and the wife, or the man and the woman. So not only that, right? He's called this. He's also, in verse 4, made overseer of all of Potiphar's house, right? He's made overseer. What was Adam done in the beginning? He was made overseer of everything, right? It says all things were put under his hand, right? Is that what God did with Adam? Yes, it's exactly what he did with Adam. That's verse 4. Except for one thing. Except for one thing, and in this story, everything's put under Joseph's hand except for one thing that belongs to his master, right? Remember that? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You can eat from every one of these trees, but this one thing you cannot have. And Joseph's there. And guess what? There's a woman in this story, just like there's in Genesis chapter 3, who sees something beautiful and good. It says, and the woman saw the tree, that it was good for fruit, right? And so guess what? The woman in this story, Eshet, once again, sees Joseph. He's beautiful, right? And she wants him. Should she have him? No. But she wants. And not only that, she offers the forbidden fruit to Joseph, right? She's like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Come and lie with me, she says, right? And he says in verse 7, how can I do this wickedness and sin against God? I can't do this. And that's actually the center of the chiasm in this chapter. I'll read it. It says, Joseph is telling her, he says, there's none greater than I in this house, and neither hath the master kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass, as she spake unto Joseph day by day, that he, listen, you need to be thinking of Genesis, that he hearkened not unto her. What was it that God said to Adam in the beginning? Because you have hearkened unto the voice of your wife, right? And what does Joseph not do? He hearkens not unto Eshet in this chapter. He hearkens not unto the voice of the wife. And so what happens? After Adam and Eve, they partake of the forbidden fruit. What do they notice about themselves? They're naked. Guess what happens to Joseph in this story, right? She comes after him. She grabs his cloak. Guess what? He's all of a sudden naked in this story. Except the nakedness is not like Adam's nakedness. It's not the nakedness that is going from chapter 2 to chapter 3, right? Because Adam was already nakedness. It's not the nakedness of shame. This is the nakedness of Joseph going from Genesis chapter 3 back into Genesis chapter 2. This is Joseph restoring the image of God. He's now like what it says about Adam and Eve, that they were both naked and they were not ashamed, right? Because he didn't commit the transgression. Not only after he's naked, God comes down, it says, and they heard the voice of God walking in the garden. It says, and the woman let out a loud voice. Ah! There's the loud voice. That's that trumpet on Mount Sinai. There it is. That loud voice when people were what? They were naked, right, with the golden calf. Adam and Eve were naked after the forbidden fruit, but Joseph's naked in righteousness. And you need to understand that that's the same thing that happens with Christ. That's why he's also naked in the end. That's why all these stories tie together. That's why these symbols are so meaningful, right? And not only that, she says in verse 17, the Hebrew which you brought unto us, right? He did this. He mocked me, right? So on and so forth. Remember what Adam said to God in the beginning? The woman which you gave me, right? So you see all these plays and these parallels. Not only that, what's she holding in her hand? His coat. The text is asking you, do you recognize the coat? Do you recognize this coat? You know what it is? It's the same coat from Genesis chapter 3 where God made a coat for Adam. He said, you want to be like an animal? I'll give you an animal skin, right? Joseph took it off, right? He was entering back into the state, being like a man. These same parallels are seen in David, right? Remember where he dances before the Lord and all of a sudden he's naked, right? Not ashamed. Finally, just like in Adam and Eve's story, he's sent out, he's banished, okay? Joseph has made tikkun for Adam's transgression. He's made a repair for it, right? And the sign of the tikkun, just like there was a sign of the repair in the Judah story, there's a sign of the tikkun in Joseph's story as well. We move into chapter 40 where guess what? He's once again in a prison, right? And there's two people that have dreams. Remember this, right? The two people have dreams, and guess what, right? They're sad, right? And Joseph asks, why are you sad? He said, oh, we had a dream, and nobody can interpret it. And what does Joseph say? It's so fascinating. He says, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me. You hear that? And guess what Joseph has? You read the story of these two dreams. One is good, right? One's a good dream. One of them's, the text says, evil. Guess who stands there with the knowledge of good and evil in the end of the Torah? It's Joseph, right? What Adam tried to take through thievery, Joseph won through obedience. And he stands there as the tree of life in the end of Genesis, with the knowledge of good and evil, so much so that he says to his brothers at the end of the book, he says, you intended this for evil, but God intended it for good. Here you have a character who knows good and evil, who has the knowledge of good and evil in the right way. So what's my conclusion? I'm sorry I went so over on this, but I feel like this is just so crucial and important. Right? Here's the conclusion of all of this. What if you lived like you believed this? What if you actually lived like you believed this? That the battles that you win or lose, you win or lose them for generations to come. That the battles that you personally win or lose, you win and lose them for generations to come. What if you believe that one person's actions could have cosmic consequences, right? That they could actually repair creation. Because that's what the Torah teaches. That what you are doing right now can literally reach into the future and affect another person's storyline. What if you actually believe the Torah, what it's saying? And if you feel overwhelmed by the amount of transgression that you've done in your own life, right? And you think, oh my God, the consequences of my actions in my children's life, You know, at the end of the book of Genesis, you would think, who would the Messiah come through? Joseph or Judah? Who do you think? You would say Joseph. It's going to come through Joseph. It has to come through Joseph. But it says that the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a ruler from between his feet. The rabbis say that in the place where the Balei Tshuva stands, the complete tzaddikim cannot stand. That there's a higher place existing for those who fall and rise than there are for people who never fall. That you can stand on a higher rung having fallen and come back up than you could have having just been perfectly righteous. And we see that is true because the Messiah comes through Judah. It's like sometimes you have to go backwards in order to go farther forward. Think of like an arrow, right? You want the arrow to go to this way, but what do you got to do first? First you got to pull it back, you know? And sometimes we have that. So also, this is the meaning of what the Messiah has done for us, right? The Messiah is making the tikkun. That's why he's in a garden. That's why there's bread and wine. That's why he's naked. That's why he's on a tree. That's why all of these symbols are there, because those symbols come from Genesis. They're from the beginning. They're from the storyline. Messiah is one man, and his actions in that garden have had cosmic implications for even you in your life. The ripple of what he did will affect all of creation. It's like that little bit of leaven that the woman sows, which is going to leaven everything. The Messiah's actions are like a wave that moves through history, lifting all of us up. So incredible, right? So, all right, I'm going to stop right there.